Welcome to Alimentary, the podcast series where you will learn about your amazing body, how it works, and of course why food is so important, and also pick up some simple recipe and lifestyle tips and tweaks to help you to influence your health in a positive way. According to the Cambridge Dictionary, longevity means living for a long time or remaining useful for a long time. I would obviously, like everybody, would like to live a long life, as long as my loved ones anyway. But I really would like to be as independent, useful, and happily busy for as long as possible. There are another two terms which might be used in conversations about aging, and they are lifespan and life expectancy. So, lifespan refers to the maximum number of years that we can live. So, I looked it up, and the most recent accepted maximum lifespan for humans that I could find, which was documented and verified, was 122 years old. That was a lady called Jeanne-Louise Calment from France who lived from 1875 until 1997, remaining relatively healthy and mentally intact until her 122nd birthday. So put a link in the notes to an article about her. Life expectancy does what it says on the tin and refers to an estimate of the number of years that we can expect to live. This figure would be estimated based on our health history, genetics, and importantly, our lifestyle. Now, like a lot of people, I have inherited certain health issues and I have inflammatory conditions in my medical history, but I haven't given up on myself. So rather than worrying or becoming anxious about it, my focus is on developing lifestyle habits which are manageable for me, which I believe will build resilience into my health, ensure that I have energy today, tomorrow, and into the future. Now, we know that we need to eat whole foods and exercise, but actually, how we think has a huge impact on our longevity. Scientific studies show that being happy and grateful has a massive positive impact on our physical health. But there is another way of thinking which can also contribute, and that is being curious. According to an article by George Lee, again I've linked to the notes, by encouraging our desire to seek out new knowledge, ask questions, and explore the world around us, curiosity may help to improve our memory, reduce the risk of chronic disease, and increase our resilience in the face of stress and adversity. So, bearing all this in mind, I received an email recently from a gentleman called Miles Spencer about a book that he wrote with his best friend Wells Jones called A Line in the Sand. Now, this is a novel which chronicles the adventures of two friends, Magnus and Finn, through the desert, following the route of Lawrence of Arabia. And it was actually inspired by Miles and Wells's own adventures trekking through the deserts of Israel, Saudi Arabia, and Syria. And they had done that because they loved the books of T.E. Lawrence. Now, while the book includes recipes, initially I wondered if the topic was for this podcast. But actually, Miles is a great example of someone who lives life well. And I thought it would be inspiring for us to hear from a man in his seventh decade who, in his own words, is nuts about longevity and health. He has finally written his book about his adventures and he continues to be really active, interested in life, and curious. Now, both Miles and his co author Wells are believers in Stoicism and mind over matter. Wells runs 14,000-foot peaks at dawn, and Miles scubas at 120 feet, and they both swim in 40-foot waters and run marathons. So I'm exhausted now just thinking about all of that. Now, we have Miles on the podcast today to tell us a little about his journey, and he describes himself as a curious guy from Pittsburgh that asked a lot of questions and strayed a long way from home. His day job, if all of that isn't enough, he has helped to create over 1,100 jobs while founding, financing, building and exiting 3 digital media companies. Prior to that, he was a venture principal at Capital Express. He hosted Money Hunt on PBS, which is a channel in the United States. He led over 1,500 people across 14 miles of open sea on kayak and trekked 1,100 miles, as we said, through the deserts of Saudi, Jordan, and Syria. And their book, A Line in the Sand, ended up as an Amazon bestseller in the Middle East. So after a bit of a pandemic reset, he is now actively investing and directly managing teams in digital media, entertainment, and consumer products. Plays rugby with his son, and he paints watercolors with his daughter. And I have a link to his website in the show notes. You can have a look at some of his watercolors up on his website, and they're really lovely. So we hope that this chat and hearing about Miles inspires you to start planning your next adventure. Of course, it doesn't have to be as complex as planning a trip through the desert, but maybe there's a town or a park or a monument or an art gallery that you haven't seen, or an activity that you haven't tried, or even a new place to go for lunch. So get thinking and stay curious. It is never too late to do something new. So I hope that you enjoy my chat with Miles Spencer. Hi, Miles.
Hey Lynn, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Uh, Dublin, if I remember correctly, right?
Cavan, actually. So it's about an hour and a half away from Dublin.
Okay.
So it's northwest of Dublin. Yeah.
Uh, okay,
Uh,
we're heading southeast of Dublin next month.
Are
Uh,
you?
yeah, so
Where?
Nina
Yeah,
Nina
Nina in County Tipperary.
in Tipperary,
I know
yeah.
it well. I know it well. And are you, I hope is it leisure?
Uh yeah, you could describe it as that.
Good.
It is my son's rugby squad is touring.
Wow. Oh my gosh, you're going to have a great time in Tipperary.
Yeah, we hope
Yeah,
so.
you will. Well, it's lovely to meet you, Miles. I know that the theme of our chat is really longevity, but I think that what your experience shows is that there are a few different pieces to the jigsaw puzzle, when it comes to longevity, because you have a really, well balanced, lifestyle. So, and I'm all about nutrition is so important, but really that's in the context of your lifestyle as well. So it's a little bit hard to know where to start because you have so many interesting things to talk about. But I was wondering if maybe we could start. I mean, your adventurous spirit, I think, definitely helps to keep people young. So would you like to tell us a little bit about your adventure through the desert?
Sure. And thanks for having me on the podcast, Lynn. I really appreciate it. Or I think I'd like to start with the fact that one key to longevity, in my mind, is to stay curious. I was born a curious boy in Western Pennsylvania, and I guess I wandered a long way from home, but always asking who, what, why, where, when. And it was those questions after 9/11 that led us first to read a lot of books, watch some movies, talk to anybody we can, and came to the conclusion that we knew so little about the Middle East and so little about the culture and the people that seemed to be perpetrating this conflict with the United States. And my co author, Wells Jones, for A Line in the Sand, was actually coming through town. He said, "Hey, what book were you? What are you reading?" I said, T. E. Lawrence, Seven Pillars of Wisdom, and so was he.
No.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, well, what do you think? So, well, it's the one Western mind in the last 100 years that's actually understood the Bedouin mentality to any degree and been able to share it in the West. Um, and that's sorely needed today. So, of course, he asked, "What do we do next?" And I said, "Well, we've got to go."
Yeah, of course.
So, on the one hand, the adventures I think do contribute to my longevity, but um, the adventures also could dramatically end my longevity at any moment.
Yeah.
And so, as my mom once said, it's not the number of breaths you take in a lifetime, it's the number of times your breath is taken away in a
Wow.
lifetime.
Oh, of course. What a nice way to put it. Because, I mean, how do you even prepare for a trip like that?
Well, we began by trying to figure out a way to tell our wives at the time. And there wasn't really any good way. Wells dealt with his. My wife's reaction was just get a good policy and make sure I'm named on it. So besides well, it's called kidnap and ransom insurance. So we had a policy on all that good stuff.
Yeah.
We were trained by a man who at the time had just retired from security at Buckingham Palace. He was Sandhurst, special forces guy that basically put us through the ringer in terms of um, how to behave, what to look for, what to avoid. And we followed his instruction to a T during the trek. And I would only say that it allowed us to experience the adventure on a much deeper basis because we weren't afraid. We were just, it was just part of the equation. And the security was not a distraction. And that really, really helped.
Yeah, and I mean, there was a respect there for the culture by taking the time to understand it. You were showing respect as well.
For sure. Look, we weren't exactly going to blend in,
Mm.
but it looked like I would imagine if you asked the border patrols and the security guards and the other people that we came upon, they probably thought it wasn't our first day or our first week or our first month in the region.
Yeah, you knew how to address people and how to talk to them.
Yes, for
Yeah.
sure.
And how long actually did it take you?
It took us 26 days from Jeddah, Saudi Arabia. It's the port city that leads to Mecca and Medina, up the Red Sea to some fortress towns called Yenbo and to a beautiful archaeological site called Magar al Shayab, which had some profound religious implications for Wells and I. Across to Aqaba, which is a scene of a great battle, but also some pretty good scuba diving. Over to Wadi Rum, which reminds me, if you've seen the movie Dune or Star Wars,
Yes.
eh,
Yes.
that's Wadi Rum.
Wow.
It's otherworldly. Um, a, a lot of experience on camels there, which is a unique story into itself. And again, there's some tips on longevity if one's going to be around camels. And then through Jordan, following essentially, again, seven pillars of wisdom, some wonderful Crusader castles, um, up to the Syrian border, which was an interesting crossing after 22 days in the desert, approaching on foot. And there was a civil war brewing. There was unrest over in Iraq. There were a lot of reasons for us not to be there, but we proceeded on to Damascus, and ultimately, our furthest north was another Crusader castle called Krak Chevalier, which is in Homs, Syria.
Were you scared at any point?
um, yes.
Yeah.
Um, I didn't have a heartbeat monitor on my watch at the time. I tend to look at it now a few times a day just to know, I have some other longevity things that I do that I make sure I watch my heart rate on. I didn't have one then, but certainly the first border crossing on foot, certainly the first time a seemingly loaded machine gun was pointed at my sternum, probably raised my heartbeat a little bit, but they were looking for reactions. They were looking for someone that had something to hide.
Mhm.
So being calm and cool with the wrong side of a revolver pointed at you
Mhm.
um, is basically somewhat of a message that, okay, you can put that down.
Yeah, exactly. Um, Obviously, they don't have. Well, I've only ever been in a desert once for one day, in Dubai, and obviously it was with the tour group, so it was all very well organized, and we had a gorgeous meal in a Bedouin village that night, you know. But it is very, you mentioned that the landscape is very surreal. You think you think you know what a desert is because you've seen it in the movies, but when you're actually in one, it's a totally different experience. It's very calming, very something serene about all of the sand dunes. But I would imagine for 26 days, you're not coming across restaurants and diners and how what did you eat? What was the food like?
Um, well, I'll focus on Wadi Rum at the moment. Um, in the desert, on the camels, it was what our guide brought along. So there was always a stew. Not certain which proteins were added to make said stew. But a little pot on a beautiful fire.
Yeah.
Always rice. And then miraculously, Saba, our guide, always had cucumbers and tomatoes. So we almost had
Yeah.
two out of three parts of a Greek salad. There was never any feta cheese around. But there were some greens in that miraculously for most of that trip. Although after, every 2 or 3 days, we'd come upon a settlement, some
Okay.
tents, and um, you would approach and ask assistance. Now, that's very important because if someone finds you on their land or at their well, you're subject to, frankly, attack. But if you walk up to that same party and ask for their assistance or their hospitality, or do you have some food, or do you have some water, they are compelled to host you, not attack you. And so we had some wonderful meals. And again, this would be uh, lamb or goat, typically called mansaf, which would be boiled in butter and sometimes served quite near whole, um, together with rice and some vegetables like onions and eggplant and sometimes tomato along the side. And you'd make a ball with the rice, almost like a sushi ball. You always eat with your right hand because you use the facilities with your left hand. And if you're sitting around
Sensible
one
and
always
hygienic.
is the right hand, you you are quickly scolded if your left hand approaches the communal dish. But you make that ball of rice and then you collect some meat with it, and it all goes in one big bite, almost like sushi, but it's lamb or goat. And then oftentimes we're offered the prime parts of the the lamb or goat, and you have to eat it. So we've done that as well. We've had camel. Um, camels are amazing animals. They are beautiful to ride. They have beautiful hair to make capes and whatnot. Um, and they're good shelter in a storm and wonderful transportation. And at the end, they cut them up and eat them.
Isn't there something lovely in that how you approach the group, the people, the settlement, the attitude that you go in with is humble, and there's something to be learned in that, isn't there? You're focusing on how you're approaching them instead of like there's a certainty in how they're going to respond to that. Something that we could all kind of learn from, I think, isn't there?
Well taken. I think humility, knowing your place, knowing the customs, um, is very important. It's just showing respect.
Mm. Exactly, exactly. Um, so obviously you must have been thrilled at the end, at the end of the 26 days, like that you had actually done it and achieved it. What would you say was the biggest thing that you came away with after having achieved that?
I hate to burst a bubble here, but we we didn't feel like there was a finish line.
Okay.
And in that sense, there wasn't achievement, feeling. There was always another day, something more. And so in Seven Pillars of Wisdom and the movie Lawrence of Arabia, um, Prince Faisal and Lawrence have done a deal with the English, and that is help with the Arab revolt against the Ottomans. If you arrive in Damascus first, you will have a beautiful kingdom from Damascus all the way down to the Crescent, and it'll all be yours. That was the deal. Um, as you may know, some gentlemen in a club in Paris and London got together named Sykes and Picot, and they had drafted a separate deal that had nothing to do with this. But Lawrence and Faisal and the Arab revolt, their finish line was Damascus. So, to a certain extent, when Wells and I arrived in Damascus, we knew we had the bookends of a story. And we also enjoyed, for the first time in 26 days or so, um, a bed and breakfast that
Hot
had French
chair.
French croissants and butter, fresh churned, and rose petal jam, and a bed
Yeah.
of wonderful linen, and a
Yeah.
pillow,
It's
and a
such a
shower.
luxury.
And so it's certainly, if it wasn't the finish line, it was certainly a good halftime.
Yeah.
Um,
And did
we
it
then
mean, sorry,
we then had a few more castles, a very dicey crossing in back into Israel across the King Hussein Bridge, and then wound up the trip in Jerusalem, which is a chapter unto itself. So Damascus felt great um, as an accomplishment, but again, it was just another chapter.
yeah. Do you I know that you believe in, the positive impact on your life that good friends and loyalty and nurturing friendships, hold. Were you glad that you did that with one of your great friends?
Well, I'd hate to imagine doing one with a great enemy. So
Good point.
Wells is a greater friend
Yeah.
because of the trip, a greater friend because of the book.
Mm.
Um, and uh, we, he's also a great partner because I have a style that tends to get us into adventure and then trouble. And Wells has a style that anticipates trouble and gets us out. And so the two of us working together
Yeah, you're a good team.
was, yes, it was a good team.
Mm. I know that you love food cooking and gathering, as in like, people gathering and coming together to eat. How important do you think that is to our well-being?
There are, in my mind, perhaps four opportunities left for me to consistently gather with those that I love and spend quality time. Shopping and preparing food is one. Sitting at the table, enjoying that food and solving the problems of the world. Actually, we have these little cards. Who's the most optimistic person you know? It's a conversation start. Somehow I can engage an 11-year-old and a 13-year-old kid for an hour without a phone. Wonderful. Um, and the third place is watching a movie together.
Mm.
and the fourth is walking the dogs.
That's right. When you're walking, you're if you're walking alongside a companion, that's great for conversation, isn't it? You know, when you're both heading in the same direction. But even watching a movie, because there's something you talk about the story afterwards
Mm.
and you
There's a
experience the
great
emotions.
there's a great saying by Antoine Saint-Exupéry, The Little Prince, Southern Male. Um, and it was having a wonderful partner is not sitting staring into each other's eyes. It's sitting next to each other, staring out at the world together. It's walking for sure.
Yeah, you're having a shared experience. If we move to your philosophy, so you believe in Stoicism. Can you, is that something that you have always, is that a philosophy that you've always followed? I've read Marcus Aurelius's Meditations. So is that something that you came to through during your life? Something that you count on now for guidance, or how important is this Stoic philosophy to you and your everyday life?
It's extremely important, but I will say that it's just a contemporary label for something that Wells and I have been doing for decades. We were both members of a church, Christian, here in the United States, that really eschewed alcohol, tobacco, medicine generally. It was formed by a woman who was basically calling out the other doctors in Boston because at the time they were still bleeding people with leeches for headaches and the rest. I mean, doctoring was a crazy business 125 years ago. And so she wrote this book, which was kind of like, it's not a pill first and it's not a surgery first, and you don't need to rush to the hospital. She believed in the power of prayer, but more in a primitive Christianity type of way. And I was raised in that. Look, I'm also practical. I've 1,000+ stitches. So I wasn't going to let my religion get in the way of getting sewn back up.
Yeah.
Uh, and so I think that that was our upbringing. And I think that life's disappointments are a result of inappropriately high expectations. I once said to a dear, dear love of mine, after a year together, she said to me, why do you suppose you're so happy? And I said, well, my dear, I've lowered my expectations. And she hauled off, just about whacked me in the head.
Yes.
Because it doesn't, so it sounds like, well, I'm your lower expectations. And I said, well, dear, I didn't say how much you had exceeded those low expectations.
Good comeback there, Miles. Yeah.
And I think that's a good lesson for life. There's so little in this universe that we control.
Yeah.
And so the universe has a plan, and it will prosecute that plan whether you're in it or not. There are a few things you can do which are in your control. I suggest you do them well. The rest, the universe will reveal when it's damn good and ready.
Yeah, we spend a lot of time worrying about things that never happen or thinking about things we'd like to change in the past, and it's just crazy. Like we miss so much of our life in our heads. Whereas if you can approach just what's the next thing in front of you, as you say, then we can spare ourselves a lot of anguish, really, can't we?
Agree.
Yeah. So I guess in terms of longevity, obviously you are very energetic and very active, very alive. And that is something that in terms of one of my whys as to why I do the job I do in terms of nutritional therapy is that's none of us are here forever. But you would like as good a quality of life as you can have for as long as you can have. And you see too many people who in their 60s, 70s, 80s, need more care. So for me, it's just all about, well, how can I stay and how can I help people stay as energetic and as independent as possible and enjoying life as long as possible. What do you think has been your secret or your recipe for achieving this?
Well, the first ingredient in the recipe is certainly DNA.
Okay.
I was named after my great grandfather, Miles Sharpless Spencer. He had 24 kids. He had his last kid when he was 74. That was my grandfather.
Wow.
And so that
How many wives did he have?
everyone asked, three wives,
Wow.
three wives. Um, so I got that DNA and the hair from him. I think that has a lot to do with everything, but nobody controls that. That's just what you get. Um, Being active every day is crucial, and doesn't necessarily mean going to the gym or maxing out in the pool, etc. It's getting the heart rate up, getting around on a daily basis. I do fast now. That's a new thing for me. So I'll do intermittent fasts of 18 hours, no food after 6 until noon the next day. And then I've done my first 75-hour fast recently, just water. And I believe in the autophagy, which would be clearing out of the perhaps old and dusty cells. And so that is helpful. I do like my athletic greens. So if I don't have enough greens during the day, I have that as a beverage. Uh, Try to stay away from too much of the adult beverages. They're enjoyable, um, but it's not an everyday thing.
Yeah.
And
In
yeah,
all in moderation.
yeah, that's moderation. I also
Mm.
tend to when I sit down for a meal, I stuff my face with greens before I eat anything else.
Yeah.
Just if you look at what you're going to take down on the plate, why not make half of it vegetables and greens?
Absolutely, yeah. Half a plate of veg is right. And like bitters, particularly bitters like rocket, I think you call it arugula, they're great for getting the digestive enzymes going. Just with regard to the fasting, how are you? So one of, I suppose, my concerns with fasting as we see it on social media is that people can do it wrong, like not nourish themselves in their fasting, in their eating window, not nourish themselves well enough. So I presume that you take good care of what you eat then when you are eating.
Oh, very much so.
Yeah.
I take great care when I reintroduce things to my
Mm,
body after a short or a long fast, and that's important. I stay clean. All January is a clean diet for
mm,
us, which is it's all I don't do it to lose weight
mm.
per se. I just do it to reset some habits
Yeah.
and to think how I think about dairy or how I think about protein, etc. So each year there's been an evolution of how I my relationship with food, how I see food. In the last few years, I've also kept a sourdough starter going, and so
Great.
make my own sourdough, and so that helps with the
Mm.
digestive enzymes as well.
Yeah, you've got lovely lactobacillus bacteria in there. Yeah. Good
Exactly.
for you. I had kefir. I was making my own kefir at one stage, but we went on holidays and then it all just went to pot. So I need to get back into it. But yeah, so obviously focusing on greens, on vegetables. How often do you fast?
Um, so the intermittent fast is probably 4 or 5 days a week. So that's 18 hours of no food.
Mm,
And so my food window is noon to 6 p.m., right?
okay.
I'll have two meals.
Yeah, but you eat your so again, sometimes people can not eat enough calories in their eating window, because they're busy. Obviously, in the long run, that can mess up with the metabolism. So obviously, you've researched it and you know what you're doing. I think sometimes, again, on social media, people get little snippets. And it's kind of like, oh, you can eat what you want if you fast. I'm not mad about that message.
I that's that's not true.
No, exactly. So, as part of as I say, the jigsaw puzzle or the tapestry of what sort of keeps you well and keeps you with enough energy to be curious about life, would you say that relationships, sleep, and staying active are as important?
Yes, and let me say this about relationships. I think, again, you've mentioned social media several times. I think that people have fallen into this trap that exceeds what's called the Dunbar line. Dunbar was a philosopher that said that Roman legions and pygmy tribes and military companies, they're all 100, 125 people, and that's our maximum that a human can actually have empathy for. And if you have this giant network of friends on social, I don't really know them. It's not really quality time. So I bring mine down and I say to myself each year, I want to spend more time with less people.
That's a good way to think about it. Yeah.
And so I think healthy, well chosen relationships are important. Being okay with letting go, saying until the next time with this, with that, I think is important.
Do you mean
Uh,
letting go of negative um, experiences?
Everything
Yeah.
with people, negative experiences, uh, negative situations.
Mm. So being giving yourself some grace and giving all the people around you some grace.
Yeah, very much
Yeah.
so. Sleep is a crucial one. I don't sleep like I used to. I've had some injuries in the last year, and that's affected my sleep, candidly. And so it's affected in two ways. I literally can bump something in the middle of the night and be wide awake and have difficulty getting back to sleep. But also um, the length and breadth of my workouts has not been as great while I've been resting up and recuperating. And so because of that, I'm not going to bed exhausted. And I it's a nice day when I get my 8 hours.
Yeah. You feel
It
great after a good night's sleep.
Yeah, 8 hours is I think I've seen it, 4 or 5 times in the last month.
Okay. Did you sleep well in the desert
Oh,
under the stars?
the stars are phenomenal. They're in a backpack, zipped up. It did, it would go down 50 degrees from noon till midnight or so. Um, and we were well fed. There was nothing else to do.
Yeah.
Tell a few
The
stories.
light go the sun goes down and that's it.
Yeah.
Yeah, you have a little chat and you're ready for Betty Bites.
And what's also interesting is the heat really does take it out of you. And so you're out. But we're up at 3 o'clock in the morning because it will give you 5 or 6 hours before the sun is too hot. By anywhere near midday, you're out of the sun. You're not traveling.
Um, will you go back to the desert miles?
Uh, we certainly will be back to Saudi, Jordan. Um, Syria looks a bit tight lately. Um, Dubai, for sure. So the answer is yes.
Very good. Very good. So I know that you have some recipes in your book as well. So what kind of food did you cook?
To be honest, most of the cooking there was done for us, and then we repeated those recipes when we got back. But one that I love to talk about and make, which is relatively easy, is the baba ganoush, which we experienced virtually every place that we went. But one particular treatment of that, which we first saw from a Lebanese woman, was adding Um, Pomegranate seeds.
Oh, super healthy. Yeah, fabulous.
Oh, it looks great.
Yeah, they look like little jewels.
They really do. That's how I make baba ganoush. And around Christmas time, I add some parsley in as well, and so it looks Christmassy.
Yeah, so it looks delicious.
It's yeah, that's that.
I'm gonna have to try it. Yeah.
Yes,
Well, Miles, thank you so much for your time and for your perspectives, on on how to stay well and to stay curious about life. I really appreciate your time.
Lynn, it's been a pleasure. Thank you.
My thanks again to Miles for his time, and I'll put a link to a line in the sand in the show notes. So, on to our store cupboard staple, and of course, as it has been mentioned already, let's go with pomegranates. Now, pomegranates have a sort of a thick, red, inedible, leathery looking skin, which might not look very appetizing, but once you open them up, you'll see several chambers inside, and each one is filled with the most juicy seeds or arils, as they're called, and they're little jewels of deliciousness. The word pomegranate is derived from a Latin word, I'm probably saying this wrong, pomum grantum, and that means apple of many seeds. Now, they're native to the Middle East, primarily Iran and northern India, but they are grown in the USA as well, mostly in California. Since ancient times, pomegranates have been considered really beneficial for our health. They are rich in several essential nutrients, including vitamin C, potassium, vitamin K, folate, and of course fiber, and then other minerals like phosphorus, magnesium, and calcium. So, with all of these things combined with the antioxidants which they contain, which include polyphenols, which I have a recent episode on, they are amazing for our heart health, to help regulate our blood pressure, our blood sugar levels, to support our urinary health and our digestive health. And they also can help to reduce the risk of some cancers. Of course, all of this is in the context of an overall healthy diet and lifestyle. We mentioned in the episode of polyphenols, of course, we know that they help to support our brain health as well, because polyphenols can help to protect our brain against neurodegenerative diseases. So, because they're helping to reduce inflammation. Obviously, reducing inflammation helps with our joint health as well. So, when some people might wonder how to actually open them, to get those lovely seeds out. So, I'll be honest with you, I just cut them in half, and then I get a bowl, and with the back of a wooden spoon, I sort of whack the outside of the pomegranate, and the seeds just kind of drop into the bowl, and you can take away the sort of the pithy bits from it. Other people will cut off both ends, and then you'll see the membranes, or like the pits, the white that is makes up the chambers which divide up the inside of the fruit, and then they cut the skin from the top to bottom, and then just peel that off and just um pry it open and let the seeds again fall into a bowl. So once you have your pomegranate seeds, what are you going to do with them? Well, literally, you can add them to anything. You can top your breakfast with a spoonful, put them into a smoothie, onto a yogurt. I add them into my quinoa salad for lunch, or as Miles said, you can top a stew, and they just actually make it look really, really delicious and appetizing. They're just literally like little jewels of color and juiciness. So hopefully there's enough information there to encourage you to add some more whole foods into your shopping trolley this week. Thank you for listening to today's episode. I just wanted to clarify that the podcast is for informational purposes only and does not substitute professional care from a doctor or trained health professional, nor constitute medical advice or services if you're in a position to need either. However, if you found it interesting, you can subscribe to make sure you don't miss future episodes, or sign up for my newsletter on lynsharkeynutrition.ie.